And it allows you to just delegate your manpower or your labor force in a more effective manner than, for example, tomorrow there'll be 4 of us out there. 2 guys will be on the tumbler, 2 guys will be out thinning bags and maintaining stocking densities. We still have stuff growing. So now we can split operations. We don't have to be standing over each other and sorting this stuff by hand anymore.
Hey everybody, welcome to ATTRA's Voices from the Field podcast. I'm really happy to be here today, and my name is Rinehart, and I work out of Pennsylvania. I'm here with Mike Miezianka of Toasted Oysters on Long Island.
Yes. Hello, Lee. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you, my friend. Really happy to be talking about your operation out there on Long Island. I thought the best thing that we could do here is just start by introducing yourself and a little bit about your journey into oyster farming.
It was a non-rudimentary journey, we'll say the least. Ray and I have been friends for close to 20 years, and we've both been in civil service jobs. And when we met, I was an emergency medical technician and he was a paramedic. And that's kind of how we formed our friendship almost 20 years ago, as we worked a per diem side gig on top of our regular job and formed a relationship and stayed friends for all those years. Throughout those years, I transgressed into a different career path, working with the New York City Police Department and ultimately retiring a couple of years ago in 2023. But routinely stayed in touch with Ray, who climbed the corporate ladder with his paramedic skill sets. And one day back in 2020, just sitting in the backyard, talking, drinking some beers, and he was discussing that oyster farming idea. Naturally got curious and started taking the same oyster farming class that Ray was taking and kind of volunteered on some of the farms and learned a little bit about the trade. I was to transition into a different career as I was near retirement, and I kind of pivoted into this oyster farming world and fell in love with it and its uniqueness. And not a lot of farmers are farming oysters per se. Vice, maybe your corn or your pepper guy or any of those types of dirt type or terrestrial farms, as you would say.
Sure. I mean, one of the things that you had said earlier is that, in some of the farming organizations and groups that you're a part of in the area, it's all terrestrial farmers and you're the only ocean farmer there. And it's almost like, wow, we have an oyster person here. We have an oyster farmer in our group. Yes. And they kind of find that as a cool curiosity.
Sure. And it generates a lot of questions and curiosity within itself. And, it's not the norm.
Yeah. Well, it's certainly not. It's certainly not the norm whenever you're thinking about agriculture, but aquaculture is practiced all over the world, and there's societies who have lived on it for centuries and such, and so it's kind of new for us, I think. There's a lot of obstacles and barriers because it is relatively new as well, which we'll talk about. Before we do that, paint a picture of what your farm is like. We rode out there on the boat a couple of weeks ago, 5:30 in the morning with the sun coming up, and it was beautiful. Just kind of approaching the farm and traveling to the farm. Very different than going to a farm on the land. What makes it unique?
Not every day you can get to the farm, depending on the weather. It could be a high wind, but the wind can be in the right direction and you'll get there, but it could be in a different direction and you're not going to take the chance and get bounced around on your boat getting out there. Every day is a little bit different. More farming days in the summer, in the warmer months per se, than the winter months. But arriving on our 3.5 acre farm, we like to say that it's shaped like a football field. About 80% of the farm is shallow water. So almost like a sandbar that we walk on. The end zones of that rectangle are deeper than as we go into that 50-yard line of the rectangle. Where the shallow water is where we have our long lines strung out, spaced a certain amount of feet apart, strung a certain amount of feet long, and we have a north side and a south side, and both replicate each other. So currently we have the north side complete, whereas we've been redesigning and rebuilding and adding equipment and an inventory. The north side is completely done. And now we're starting to grow into that south side.
Yeah, and it really is a unique setup. And what a great, the systems that you have in place in order to produce these oysters is really simple. We're talking floating cages with 6 like semi-rigid bags in each one, right?
Yes. And simple. It's a process. It's a simple process. It's repetitive and monotonous, and can be labor intensive. I always tell people that, if you're an oyster farmer, you better pay attention to Boy Scouts, because it's a lot of knots. We use a lot of different knots with the ropes, and every line we use is specific to a different knot that we want to use. Whether it's an end knot, mid knot, intertwine a knot, name it. We have those types of knots out there, and if you don't know them, you learn them quickly, because once you start losing equipment, you start seeing dollar signs fly out of your pocket, and you make sure you secure equipment with the proper knots. But a lot of, like you said, a lot of rudimentary equipment. I mean, not per se. Maybe we do use duct tape on the farm, actually, and we use PVC pipe, and we use zip ties, and normal everyday things you're going to find in your garage, and they work for us, and effectively they work.
Right. Right. Yeah, because when we're sitting out there and standing overlooking the farm, on the floating dock you've got there right next to the tumbler. Every now and then you'd point something out. Oh, okay, that one over there is leaking. That's got that float's got a leaking pontoon that's going to have to get fixed. And there's always something that's got to be fixed, or something that you've got to tend to while you're doing production, because you guys were moving the whole time whenever we were out there. You're always moving. There's a lot going on. Those as we're talking about the equipment, we're talking about the floats, the floating cages, the semi-rigid bags and such. The gold mine is what's in them, right? Sure. And tell us about the kind of oysters that you raise, their uniqueness.
Sure. And maybe I like to refer to it as floating gold sometimes. The uniqueness of where we're farming, we're in the Great South Bay, which is home of the Blue Point oyster. The Blue Point oyster has a unique flavor due to our water flow, which is given to us by the proximity to the Fire Island Inlet. So we're having a high flow rate of water, which brings in an enormous amount of nutrients, which the oysters need to feed off, like to eat and to grow. And phytoplankton being one of them, maybe carbon, maybe some nitrogen, all the messy stuff in the water that the oysters can filter. With that being said, that water flow is constantly bashing, into those oysters, and they get that really salty taste, or like we like to call it briny, that brininess. We're unique to that. And that constant water flow is also making those oysters bounce off each other and chip each other, and chipping each other stimulates their growth and gives it that cup that we're kind of known for. And that cup is the nice plump meat, which is what you're looking for, as the end consumer is looking for when they're eating it raw or putting on their favorite topping, oysters Rockefeller in the oven, and so on and so forth. But uniquely, where we are in the Great South Bay, the Blue Point oyster is where it's at, the only place in the world.
Yeah. Well, really, and I'd like to talk about a little bit later, some of the places where those oysters go, because you've built a pretty decent outlet of distributors, and you're expanding into several more states this year, and it looks like things are going pretty good. But before we get into that, there's a lot of folks out there who really appreciate what's going on with oyster farmers, and then you've got other people who may have some trepidation about it. But what we've learned is that this is a really environmentally beneficial form of farming. I wonder if you'd kind of comment a little bit on how oysters really contribute to water quality and that overall ecosystem health, not only in that beautiful estuary that we were in, but even out into the deep ocean.
Sure. Again, where we're located in the Great South Bay, we are lucky for that high flow rate of water, which flushes a lot of negative or nutrients in and out, and doesn't really let anything bacteria-wise set up. When that bacteria kind of grows, that microalgae can kind of form into some algae blooms. Those algae blooms are responsible for your red tides and your brown tides, and those damage marine ecosystems within itself. Oysters, an adult oyster will filter approximately 50 gallons a day. While that's filtering all those microalgae and phytoplankton and nitrogen, that's mitigating those algae blooms from forming. And that's one of the benefits. A second benefit with us having our oyster cages out there, we have a lot of shoreline erosion, especially if you start going out on eastern Long Island towards the tips. You start having the Army Corps of Engineers jump in there and trying with dump trucks of sand. These oyster cages are reducing wave energy out in the middle of the bay, so that when it hits the shoreline, it's a little bit reduced. and we're kind of mitigating that. I don't want to say on a grand scale, but there is some positive effects with reducing that shoreline erosion with our equipment out there. To go back with oysters filtering, I mean, Long Island is a filtration system within itself, based on top of the soil layers that they have. And this is probably going a little bit. This is beyond a little bit of my expertise. But the way our soil is layered, it's kind of a natural filter system. So we do feel the effects of what you put in your lawn, your fertilizers, and creates those nitrogens that come into the bay. Eventually, it works its way through that water table, and we feel it out in the bay. And that was maybe a lot that contributed to some of those brown and red tides that occurred, years ago, where the regulations are not what it was to what it is today.
There's a lot of mitigation, and I hadn't really thought too much about how it can kind of slow down, wave strength and pressure and such like that. But, whenever you look across, whenever you're approaching your farm, there's farms all out there. So you got like 23 farms in this area. That's a lot of footprint, but it doesn't take away or detract from the estuary at all. I mean, it doesn't interfere with traffic. I found that it was a really complementary use and a beneficial use of the bay, for sure.
Yes, and we don't really get too many outside boat traffic just due to the shallowness of where we are. It's mostly unnavigable, but if you know the channels, you can get in and out of there. And where those channels are, you have freedom of navigation. There's no equipment or farms in your way.
So we've talked about the sustainability of the farm and, kind of the ecological benefits of what's going on. What does a typical day look like, throughout the season of being an oyster farmer? Because I can only imagine maybe someone's listening to this pod and saying, wow, this is something that I've heard about and I might be interested in doing something like this. What does your day look like throughout the seasons?
Throughout the seasons, especially now, as soon as you start hitting March, we'll say that's beginning of spring, we'll start getting our gear out of winterization. Winterizations may or may not be us removing our cages and putting our bags on the ground. Depends on the farm. Depends on what maybe the farmer's almanac says this year on what winter is going to be like. Usually it's 50-50 on whether they're right or not. You start preparing for full-on summer operations in about March. And you're getting your equipment out there, which consists of your cages. You're checking your lines. You're getting your bags off the ground if you put them on the ground, get them floating. The oysters free and clear of any mud that may have gunked up in the bags over the winter. And as the water temperature gets warmer and those nutrients start becoming more abundant, the oysters are going to start growing. And you want to maintain your stocking density. Stocking density is as simple as it seems. Don't let your bags get too packed. Keep them thin because you want that flow of water to get through there. And if your bag is stocked with oysters, they're going to suffocate each other. They're going to prevent each other from growing. So you have to be on top of that. The more oysters you have, the more thinning you're going to be having to do. And that becomes more labor intensive. Can you keep up with yourself, or do you need a college kid, or do you need another hand? So that's one aspect of what we're encountering as we go into the summer. As they're growing, you also need to maintain your sizing, small, medium, large. You need to know what's ready, almost ready, going to be ready in 2 weeks, and you need to get those oysters to the tumbler. That's another process. That's labor intensive as too, depending on how much you have. You have a lot, you got to get that through that tumbler, get your farm organized. And the main goal is the oysters that are ready, get them off the farm. You don't get them off the farm, it's just a hobby. We're here we are at the end of the day, a for-profit business. We do want to put money back in our pocket from our investment. And that's the name of the game in the summer. And you will continue to do that process of thinning bags, tumbling, sorting, and harvesting and getting the ones ready for the market out to the distributor, the private customer, or the restaurant. You got it. And then those 4 or 5 things are going on at the same time. And the weather changes. So those variables throw kinks in a lot of things. You may have a plan. I can have a plan right now, what I'm doing tomorrow morning, and we do. We can go out on the farm tomorrow, 7 a.m., and get out there, and it'd be a line broken. And now cages are strung. Now, my whole day is 3 hours of my day is going to be jammed, and whatever I planned on is not going to work out. So there's always the unexpected out there. In the summer, kind of happens maybe a little bit more so than not, just because we have a lot more equipment out there, a lot more things going on, a lot more water flow going on. We try to have a plan, but we're always bracing for impact that there might be something wrong out there. And there's ways to monitor it. You can have cameras out there, and that is effective to some point. the salt water eats your cameras, the batteries, the solar panels, it eats all that up. So you can monitor it for some time, and then eventually your camera's you gotta get a new one. But as that is going on, now we're in the fall. Things are still kind of happening. We're still very busy. It's 7 days a week we're out there just trying to maintain our stocking densities and get the oysters off the farm right now to the market. In the next month, we're going to be starting to think about getting into winterization mode, sort the farm, get its final sorting done because the water temperature is going to start getting down to 45 degrees Fahrenheit. We're still in the low 70s. We still got 30 degrees to go. About 45 degrees, the oysters start hibernating around that temperature. And once they hibernate, they're not filtering anymore. They're not growing anymore. So you want to get your farm sorted, small, medium, large, ready for market. So you know what your winter inventory is, and you know what you're going to put away, wherever you're going to stash it on the farm, organized for next spring. As we do that, we'll be removing cages due to the fact that just in case the bay freezes, once that ice breaks up, that ice is the devil. It will rip your lines apart. It will mangle your cages. It will tear everything in its path. And as you have your winter inventory, you're just taking your orders and harvesting when they come in. You're not out there so much trying to maintain your stocking densities as much as you have your bags on the bottom of the bay. You don't want them to sink down into the bay floor too much because of the tides going in and out. That shoaling will occur, the sand going in and over that bag. It'll start covering it. You don't want your oysters to suffocate. So you want to fluff the bag or flip the bag. Just keep flipping it. And in the winter, you don't have to do it as much as you do in the summertime, maintaining, if it's on the bottom, you don't have to maintain it as much. Once a week, once every 2 weeks, we would recommend once a week. Just keep them fresh on top and then waiting for spring.
Yeah. So earlier you mentioned, the tumbler. And that's something, you're using that piece of gear every day, right? That's something that's really important. I wonder if you could describe that really interesting piece of gear.
Sure. This piece of gear you can buy commercially. It's generally made out of stainless steel. It's very expensive. I like to use the TV show Gold Rush on A&E or whatever channel it's on, where they have the trommel and they're constantly dumping dirt into that trommel and looking for gold and however they sift it. We have a similar trommel, except our trommel has holes strategically placed throughout the tube. And again, small, medium, large, we'll say for layman's. We'll put the oysters in the top of the tube as it's tumbling, which is being tumbled or powered by a dump truck motor with skateboard tape as grip for the tire and powered by a 12-volt battery. We use a deep cycle battery in the marine world, and that's what we use. And that spins the trommel around. And that's how the oysters get tumbled around and sorted through those holes. They bounce off the pipe. The pipe is 18-inch diameter sewer pipe. We acquired the idea from watching YouTube from another oyster farmer out on Long Island. We kind of customized it to our needs, but used most of the concepts that this farmer had used and just made it work for us. And it does. And the alternative is hand sorting. Labor intensive, especially when you have a lot of oysters. You can get the same effect of a tumbler by hand sorting and shaking the oysters around the bag and chipping them yourselves, whereas a tumbler does it for you.
I can't imagine what our day would have been like.
Yeah.
A couple of weeks ago if we didn't have a tumbler.
And Ray and I used to do that. And after the first year, I guess this year and a half in, the second time around, we're like, all right, we got to get this thing sorted out. And we had a friend who is smart on engineering this type of machinery, and we bounced the idea off of him, and he was able to come up with a mechanism of how we can go about building this, and just using Schedule 80 PVC and an 18-inch diameter sewer pipe. The cost was more than 50%. We'll give, to be fair, we'll say 50% less than it would be if I purchased it brand new from the commercial establishment that makes these out of stainless steel, plus shipping. We didn't have to pay that. That's expensive. It's not in New York State, so we would be paying a pretty penny.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's really, really good. Simple piece of gear that's kind of like the backbone, I think, of your operation. It really allows you to scale. Like you have.
It does.
This winter for sure.
It definitely does. And it allows you to just delegate your manpower or your labor force in a more effective manner than, for example, tomorrow there'll be 4 of us out there. 2 guys will be on the tumbler, 2 guys will be out thinning bags and maintaining stocking densities. We still have stuff growing. So now we can split operations. We don't have to be standing over each other and sorting this stuff by hand anymore.
Now, really interesting. Okay, so I wonder now, before we go into some of the things about about your marketing and such. What are some of the biggest challenges that you and Ray have, are facing and is facing oyster farmers on Long Island today?
What Ray and I are currently facing, and we're starting to grow out of this phase, is just being a beginning farmer to begin with. We're 3.5 years in. In the oyster farming world, it takes about 3 years for your crop cycle, your staggered crop cycle, to start catching up and start clicking every year on rotation to get more of an effective inventory cycle, I guess, to get oysters to the market, money back in your pocket, and spending money for next year. It takes about 3 years. So it's somewhat of a heavy investment cost up front with a high reward in return. And that's if you want to go to the level that Ray and I are at. You can stay small. We're 2 mouths though. We have to feed 2 mouths and we have to have a larger operation. So our footprint is going to be is a little bit bigger. So you can start off small and you can grow into, a larger operation within 5 years easily. What we thought was a lot of oysters in the beginning was 100,000 oysters. Now we're exceeding that into the millions. And we're more comfortable. But you need to start at that 100,000 first to kind of, bang your finger a little bit and kind of say, oh, I don't need to do that. Don't do that. I need to do this. You need to do that. And that's a challenge just for the individual farm. Challenges on Long Island, a lot of us are selling. We have 23 of us in the same area. We're selling the same product at the same day, at the end of the day. It's all a Blue Point oyster. We have our micro brands and we maybe our farm techniques are a little bit different from each other, but essentially the same oyster. We go down to Eastern Long Island, you go 20, 30 miles east of us, you have the Peconic oysters. And there is a lot of oyster farms out there. So you have a large shellfish stock that needs to be sold during the summer months. And it's not that we are competing against each other so much, but essentially you are, even though we're not in a competition with each other. The distributors are going to pay a certain price and they're going to go to whoever they want to go to. And if there's only a certain amount of distributors, there's only a certain amount of oyster farmers that can sell to them. So you lose diversification just being sold locally. And you have to look at some of your horizons and start looking at other states and regions maybe and expanding your search there. Because there is a lot of oysters here that get sold. And the distributors and the wholesalers, it's at their pickings on who they want to select. And, I guess it's about the relationship, it's about what inventory you have. Some farming techniques distributors don't like, and they don't like floating cages like we have. They rather have the bottom harvests. They feel they have a reason or theory for that, and that's their prerogative. But they can pick and choose. They're very picky and choosy, and that's just because we have a decent amount of oyster farms on Long Island to provide a decent quantity that's available for the market.
But you've talked about the distributors and such, and I guess that's where you started, right? You start with the distributor.
Sure. I think anyone getting into the oyster farming game to start with, and Ray and I were told this in the very beginning, before you start doing retail and restaurants, you want to start selling volume. You want to buy bigger oyster seed, have them grow quicker. They're more expensive, but sell them quicker, get more money back into your pocket, and then reinvest. Yeah. Once you get these established relationships with those wholesalers and distributors, then start branching out into maybe your farmer's market, your backyard private event, a wedding, or the restaurant, because those, now you have that, you're always going to have that sale of the volume going out of your farm. Now you can charge a little bit more of a premium and do those private events or restaurants. That's kind of where we're transitioning to. At this moment in our business life, we're starting to hit more restaurants and do more private events.
And how are the chefs receiving your product? And
a lot of the way you can get into a restaurant is you bring a sample, a dozen or 2 dozen. Usually it's a dozen. Some you just walk in the kitchen. Others you have to make some sort of communication with them first. They may already be buying from someone else and don't want your product, and that's fine. They may be open to looking at your product. And for our farm, Ray and I would go in and give a presentation of this is what our oysters look like. This is how we farm them. Chefs are kind of looking for a strong hinge. They don't want to shuck and break hinges because now the hinge and the shell is getting into the oyster and they have to clean it out because they don't want their customer at the table eating shells. So a strong hinge is important and to be mindful as a farmer when you're out there farming your oysters. Once you show them product, they'll taste the product. Here on Long Island, we're spoiled. There's a lot of seafood. Everybody knows what everything tastes like. They sometimes don't even need to know what a Blue Point oyster tastes like. They've had it before. They know what it is. All right, just give me 500 for the week. We'll try it out. It depends on the restaurant.
So now that you're taking this next stage in your journey, and kind of growing out more oysters, more markets and such.
Sure.
You're starting to market them like further away into other states. Even now, are you at restaurants, or are you looking at other distributors, say in other states?
So we're going to take the footprint that we use in the first 2 years of our business and apply it that we did locally and apply it outside of New York State. Yeah. Go to the wholesalers first or the distributors and see what the temperature is like, and start possibly moving product in that direction, because their customer base at those restaurants outside New York State are different than what are on Long Island or upstate New York or New York City. Everybody's flavor or palate is different. On top of that, establishing some relationships with some restaurants. We're trying to target a little bit more higher end restaurants, not too many, and just kind of feel it out, see how it goes, and then take it from there next year. But that's the kind of the goal that we've been doing this year. I've been kind of checking the box on that and see how it goes. But we strongly feel that diversifying our business is vital, just due to the fact that there is an oversaturation of shellfish in the Northeast region.
Yeah. Given the fact that, with the local food movement and people are wanting to pay attention to where their food comes from a little bit more these days.
Sure.
How has the demand for your product, for locally sourced seafood, changed over the years? And where do you see that trend?
The trend just seems to keep going up. It doesn't matter what we thought 3 years ago. It doesn't apply right now.
Wow.
It just seems the trend with specific to oysters, I feel as though there's just always going to be a market. And that market's just ever expanding. I think as the knowledge base has expanded and maybe the educational webinars or resources have reached the general public, and people are a lot more aware of what oysters do and how they're farmed and their necessity in the local ecosystems that help clean these bays. And that may be a contributing factor. And we are able to feel that, because no matter how many oysters we put on this farm, they're sold. They're going. I don't know how else to describe it. The more I put, the more I'm going to sell. And it's just a matter of Ray and I maintaining that inventory, keeping them alive and being able to do all those laborious tasks. And we may be able to stuff it with 5 million, but I don't think we can handle 5 million on the farm at this moment in time. We don't have enough manpower, resources, etc., equipment, but eventually we could. And I feel as though we could sell all that in due time if we put that many on the farm. And there are guys in the Northeast corridor from Maine down to Virginia who are pumping that number out.
Well, you got room to grow. I think you're using like an acre and a half of a 3.5 acre lease.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
You got a lot of room to grow.
We do. And we're, as I said in the beginning, we're using all the shallow water area at the moment. So now we're just figuring out what technique are we going to use as we grow into that deeper ends, the deeper ends of the farm. Are we going to use bottom cages? Are we going to use floating cages? We're not sure. Right now, we're comfortable where we are as a business and what our inventory stock looks like and what our manpower situation looks like and what our equipment, we're good at this moment in time. I think next year that'll be next year's challenge, and see if we keep it the same for another year or decide to expand a little bit.
Well, like any farming operation, everything changes with the weather, with scaling up, with demand, with regulations, whatever, right? And whereas, marketing and getting the oysters to market is one end of that whole production chain. Before you can even do that, you've got policy and regulatory challenges and stuff that you have to make sure that you maintain.
Yes.
How do you navigate all of those policies and regulations that you're required to adhere to?
Shellfish is one of the highest regulated agricultural industries in the country. A lot of paperwork. Every time you go out on that farm and touch an oyster, you're doing paperwork. During certain months of the year, you are required to sell oysters at a certain temperature, that requires icing, that requires refrigeration, a lot more paperwork. These policies generally don't change too dramatically from year to year. Some tweaks here and there. Most of it's regulated by the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. We have all oyster farmers have relationships with their respective DEC personnel, whether it's their permit office or the food inspector that comes and inspects your refrigerators or your boats or your ice machine quarterly. Every quarter, they're coming. They're checking your harvest logs, your invoices, your everything. So if there's a change in any regulatory policy, you're going to know about it because DEC is going to send out an email. They're going to bring it up at your quarterly inspection. Hey, you need to be mindful of this. We see this coming down from the FDA or Army Corps Engineers or whatever agency is changing some sort of policy in the water. And there's a lot of people, there's a lot of agencies that have their hands in the water. You know, there's the Coast Guard, the Army Corps, the town that we lease the farm from or the bay bond from. The DEC. Everybody's got their hands in it. Everybody has a little bit of a different rule. Some piggyback off each other, and some are different. And that's just our area. But if I started to move my farm, 20 miles to the east, I'm now in a different township. That township might want something a little different than what the DEC has. Whereas the township of Islip, where I'm at, we're kind of copacetic with everything the state is doing. But I'm not in those townships, so I can't speak for them, and I don't know all their rules. I know Islip's rules, and I know DEC's rules. And then who owns the bay bottom is another question. As you start going to these different lease sites, Suffolk County Aquacultural Lease Program, SCOUT, they're a large leasing program. They're in Gardner's and Peconic Bay. There's lease sites available now. They have plenty. You just have to apply and go through the interview process. And I know that they're looking for some sort of educational background in the marine or oyster farming world or some sort of that, or something to that effect. But they're available. They're there. Suffolk County has different rules than town of Islip. Lease fees are different. It just depends where you land.
There's a lot to navigate there, seriously, and you could almost get overwhelmed. But you had said earlier in another conversation that whenever you first started, you took the same course that Ray had took by the township, yes. Basic, oyster farming type class, just the
familiarization.
Yeah, right. But then I think what really mattered for you was going out and volunteering on farms that were out there, getting to know them, doing some of the work, and then establishing a relationship so that they could answer questions as well.
Yes, that hands-on training was invaluable to see what actually goes on. It's one thing to be on a projector screen or a PowerPoint, it's another going out there and saying, oh, okay, this is how it's done. I see this. I can do that. That's not as terrible as I thought it was going to be. And different farming techniques require you to do different things in the regulatory world. Some farmers will not maybe use floating cages because once you put floating cages on the water, you have to have bird mitigation. That's another expense. That's another regulation you got to satisfy. You got to keep the birds off the cages. That farmer's like, I don't want to deal with it. So I'm going to grow my oysters in bags and put those semi-rigid bags on the ground, and I'm gonna fluff them every 3 days, 5 days, whatever their schedule is, and that's what they're doing. Do they get a better oyster? And it's up to the consumer at the end of the day. Nobody knows what the perfect oyster is, and anybody tells you that they do it, I don't think they're right. The customer is always right at this point.
No, that's great. So that kind of gives us a good segue into, addressing the needs of like beginning farmers, And so you and Ray have been doing this for 3.5 years or so. What's some of the advice that you would give to someone who's interested in getting into oyster farming?
Definitely take some classes on shellfish farming in general, and farming on Long Island is maybe different than the Chesapeake's, and that may be more suitable for you or more to your liking. The oyster farming up and down this northeast corridor is completely different. Even on the West Coast, completely different rules.
In different species as well.
And the West Coast is a Pacific oyster. We're an Eastern oyster, and depending on where you are, it's going to depict your farming technique. No two farms are the same. not even in the same area. What goes on my bay floor with the water column is completely different from my neighbor who's 50 yards away from me. He could have a completely different shoaling pattern, completely different wave action, and that's just the way it is. And if you start going down south or you start going up north, those farmers are doing different techniques, multiple techniques I haven't even spoken about to you during this podcast, and that might be suitable for them. That might be more advantageous.
Right. So again, it just drills home the advice of volunteering on a farm.
Sure.
And these farmers out there must really love it because they're getting free help and you're learning.
Sure.
And not only that, but you're actually then can use them as a source of information. Things like, how do I access a lease? How do I navigate regulations? How do I make relationships with distributors? Where do I purchase semi-rigid bags, right? And then some of the best ways to use some of this equipment. I mean, you've modified equipment that you've bought, right?
Sure.
And
Yes.
and you learn that over time, but you can also learn tricks and things like this from the farmers that you work with.
Yes, absolutely.
You're in your learning stage, so I think that's really important.
I remember Ray and I doing things we would never do now that were so laborious, and we're like, why are we doing this with this cage? We should just be doing it that. But that's kind of what we learned and kind of grew in. The farm we bought came with this equipment, and we kind of were familiar with this floating cage system, and that's what we went with, and that's what worked for us, and we made it work for us when it didn't work for us.
As I was, researching, oyster, shellfish farming, seaweed farming, things like this, it's easy to get overwhelmed just with whenever you're looking at leasing. You mentioned earlier all of the entities that have an interest in that at bay bottom, right? And so all of that has to be satisfied, and it can be really daunting. But you're doing it. You made it,
Sure.
right? And you did it because you learned, you worked on other farms, you made relationships, and where your operation is right now is pretty impressive. You and Ray have been working hard, and I know so because I watched you for a day, right? There's a lot of good stuff going on out there.
And that's another benefit of having a partner. Like Ray and I are yin and yang. What he takes care of, I don't have to worry about, and vice versa. And that kind of lessens the stress load of running this operation that we're doing, and that takes just a lot of stress off each other. And that helps out too. So when you're there by yourself, and you start growing and scaling, it is going to be a lot more challenges to manage, and they can be overwhelming, as you said, and especially with the regulations.
Yeah. But people are doing it. You did it. Other farmers are doing it. Like I said, there's 22 other farms out there besides yours, all doing it a different way. They all have their own path and they're learning. I mean, I remember, one boat, one of your neighbors was bags on the bottom, but he had a special system on his boat where he would actually just kind of go along the line and lift the bags up, right? In order to tumble them, to check them, maybe defoul, whatever. And everything was done right there from the boat. So there's a lot of different mechanization, technologies, but you're going to have to scale towards that, right?
Sure. And that may be a different type of farming where they may not be selling the same size oyster as us or producing the same volume as oysters as us, but it works for them, right? They're a larger farm than us. They have a little bit more space, not to say that we couldn't do the same thing, but he's my neighbor, and we are no farmers alike, and what works for us doesn't necessarily work for him.
Yeah. No, it was great. And there was even some farms that were even in shallower water than yours as well.
Yes, very much so.
I think that after this conversation, it sounds really positive. It seems like there's really a demand for these products. The best oysters, I'm not going to kid you. The best oysters I ever had were shucked by you whenever we were standing out on that floating pontoon.
That's hard to attain from a person who likes Gulf oysters to begin with. People who like Gulf oysters are definitely hard hard set on their opinion that Gulf oysters are the best. So
exactly. Right. I grew up.
I'm not going to comment any further to offend anyone that's flying in the Gulf, as I know some of those guys down there.
Yeah, no, that's what I grew up on. I grew up on Gulf oysters, and I love them, but I'm telling you, just the freshness. And you talked about the briny, savory flavor of that oyster after it was shucked was incredible. And then you go, you want another? It was like, of course. Are we going to have lunch now or what? No, no. It's a great product, and it's totally doable. It just seems like you got to have some gumption and some drive, and you've got that. Pull your resources together. There's lots of people out there to help. Your neighbors, the regulators that come out and may bug you, but they're going to give you the answers. They're going to help you, tell you what's going on.
Sure. And I think the relationships with the regulatory agencies is vital to your operation. Right? I mean, if I've had questions out there where things are not going as well as we planned, and we're like, hey, we're nearing maybe a red line of some sort. Yeah. Call your inspector. Hey, this is what I got going on. What do I do? Exactly. I don't want to do this and then get dinged for that. I don't want to do that and get dinged for this. So what do I do? And that's what they're there for. Yes, nobody likes to be told what to do, and nobody wants to hear that their equipment may not be in line with what the policy says. And we were spoiled growing up here on Long Island. We had access to clams, oysters, scallops, you name it, we had it. And there really wasn't any regulatory policies in place, and everything was over harvested. And then there was nothing. So that's one of the goals of the oyster farm, is to start creating natural shell stocks of these oysters where they haven't been in a while, to start naturally reoccurring. And the regular person can go out in the bay and harvest and find oysters like they do clams now. Clams are back. They're plentiful. You can go anywhere, stick your feet, hands in the mud, you're going to get them. And they want the same for the oysters in some capacity. Now that there is more control over the industry per se, that's not a bad thing at the end of the day. And nobody wants to get anyone sick. So that's another reason why we have a lot of these policies and control in place.
Well, everybody wants a sustainable and healthy fishery, and we've learned how to do it right, especially in Great South Bay, where you said that sometimes people will buy your oysters just to go and restock natural oysters out in the bay, right?
Sure. Some of these conservation groups will want to purchase our oysters, maybe mostly the ones that we can't sell, but they still do the same job as a regular oyster we sell to the market. They just, maybe there's 2 or 3 that grew together that won't break apart and heal themselves. So we can't sell that. Or they're just too big, or they just look ugly, or they're too flat. There's myriad of reasons why we wouldn't put it out on the market, but they're still doing the same job as if they were going to be sold to the market, I guess. And they'll take those oysters and put them on reefs that are being built around Long Island. And they do this every year. And it helps the farmer out, get rid of product that he can't sell, and puts money in his pocket, and it's still going to the benefit of the local ecosystem and trying to establish these natural oyster reefs.
Well, sometimes I think, conversations like this, if I was 30 years younger, wow, I know what I'd do.
Sure. It can be a young man's game, but then you have to change your farming technique, and then it can be an old man's game. And, the bags on the ground is definitely a less laborious farming technique than the cages. Ray and I like the cages, and that's what we're doing for now. And till we start getting back pain and elbow pain, we'll rethink what we're doing out there.
Well, the system you have is amazing. It's from everything it's doing, from providing you guys with a livelihood to providing good food for people on Long Island and points beyond now, and for what it's doing to the Bay ecosystem. I think it's a win-win. Love having this conversation with you, Mike. Really do. My last question to you is going to be, how do you like to eat oysters best? What's your favorite way?
I like them raw, right out of the bay. Taste that natural flavor. I do enjoy my partner Ray likes to do the culinary stuff, and he makes a great minuet sauce, and I do like his minuet, so I'll put that on there every once in a while. But raw is just the way to go. I like the salt. I can taste the salt. It's really good.
Oh yeah, no, it's really briny, really savory. I just wanted to keep going. And it makes me mindful of another question. The name of your farm is Toasted Oysters. How did you come up with the name?
Just by drinking beers with Ray back in 2020. We were drinking, might have been a little toasted, and came up with this idea. I mean, I fully give Ray the credit for creating this concept of oyster farming. I had no ambition or thoughts of owning an oyster farm until Ray was drinking some of his cocktails we were enjoying, and we're here now, 3.5 years in, doing well, and knock on wood, keeps on going forward.
Well, it's an amazing story, Mike, and I really thank you for being with me for this time. And I just wish you all the best. And hopefully we can stay in touch. Come out to the farm some more, do some educational programs and such. I think we've talked about some visions that maybe we can.
Yes.
Maybe we can do some outreach together and get some more people on the water. But
absolutely. We're definitely welcoming of your program out on our farm and look to assist you in any way we can.
Yeah, and vice versa, my friend. So it's Toasted Oysters. Make sure to put that in the show notes and everything. And
thank you.
People can visit your website and look for opportunities to, when you're on Long Island to look up what it's like to experience a Blue Point oyster, because it's definitely a life changer. Thank you, Mike. Thank you,
Lee. Really much appreciated.
That's it for this episode. Thanks for listening. Additional information about this episode and related resources can be found at atra.ncat.org. Don't miss an episode. Subscribe to Voices from the Field wherever you get your podcasts. ATRA, Voices from the Field, is produced by the National Center for Appropriate Technology, headquartered in Butte, Montana. It's supported by the USDA Rural Business Cooperative Service as part of NCAT's ATRA Sustainable Agriculture Program. Any opinions, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this recording are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of the USDA or NCAT. We'll catch you again next week, and until then, keep on farming.